Hey guys, welcome back to Seller Sessions. Bring back friend of the show, Kian Glzari. How you doing?
All good, Danny. All good. How are you? It was good to see you in Vegas, actually. What was that, a couple of weeks ago?
Yes, I'm still getting over it now, the jet lag and everything else. It was very much, had a lot of good fun there, met loads of great people. It's great for networking, basically. I spent a lot of time with people more so in the sessions. So I'm actually actively working back through the sessions now for the ones that I've missed. But yeah, good to see you there. And we're going to be, before we get going, we're going to see each other again because in October, we're covering off the same trips, aren't we?
Yeah, exactly. I think we're doing China Magic together, Athena's trip, and then also Global Sources as well, Michael's trip. So,
Yeah, so you've got Megalish Trip, which is Global Sources, and when I arrive, I'm going to go and do Cross Border Summit for Michael Michelini. So I'll give details further down the line about that. But today's about you. So, subject for today, talk to me about this, what we're going to cover today.
yeah, I mean, China, basically, my whole background and experience, for those of you who don't know me, is I've been living and working in China for the past 10 years. In that time, I've developed over 2,500 products, and I've worked with on my own brands, a lot of other brands, developed brands for big box retailers in the UK and the US. Also worked with licensing, Olympics, NBA, NFL, then United Nations. So a wide variety of experience. And in the last couple of years, I've just sort of come into the Amazon community and just been able to help out, doing some podcasts like this and events and webinars and things like that. And just happy to share my knowledge, and hopefully the listeners can benefit from it.
Sounds good. So, should we get straight in?
Yeah, let's go for it.
So, talk to me about these constant changes that are going on with all the factors and everything that you're seeing at the moment on the ground.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I stay in tune with China. I'm on email and calls with them every single day. I visit maybe 3 or 4 times a year, and I think it's very, very important, and it's quite often overlooked why it's so valuable to stay in touch with what's going on in China, because they are constantly going through changes, and if you can stay on top of that, then you can allow that to really benefit your business. Like, for example, the raw material prices keep going up in certain provinces. The labor costs keep going up. Because there's a growth in the middle class in China. So as a result, you have a lot more people with a disposable income. So you see like KFCs, Pizza Hut, Starbucks, nightclubs, all of those sort of things like popping up. And how that affects us is that the young labor force that used to go work in a factory now go work in a Starbucks. Like, who would want to work in a factory when you can work in Starbucks? So as a result, the factories have to move more and more inland, more into the rural areas, to attract better workers. But then if you're on the ground in China, you can see that sort of stuff, and you can move to those factories at the same time and sort of benefit from that. Then there's also like the consumer habits in China. China is a growing market in itself. So sometimes factories think, okay, dealing with the export market is too complicated. I'll just focus on the domestic market. And then also the stock market, real estate market is booming in China. So previous factory owners were like, okay, running a factory is very stressful and very hectic. Why don't I just get involved in invest in real estate? And then you also have like government regulations where the government can shut down a factory for a month because like the pollution is too high or something like that. So if you've got an order that you're desperate to get out, and then all of a sudden your factory tells you that the pollution level is too high and you can't produce for a month, then that'll seriously affect you. And then one of the most important things which you have to stay in touch with is the exchange rates. So for example, I think last year in May, $1 was 6.2 RMB, and
Wow.
in November, $1 was 6.9 RMB. So the difference is zero point 0.7, which is more than 10%. So if you pay your supplier $100,000 in May and then pay them $100,000 again in November, they've made over $10,000 just on the exchange rate. So quite often, so many people are trying to negotiate price down and change their products, but actually go on a website called xe.com, and it charts the dollar against RMB or any currency you want in a graph. You can screenshot that, send it to your supplier and say, look, I sent you a payment on this date and I sent you a payment on this date. And as a result, you've made an extra $10,000. Now, what I need to do is for you to pass that on to a saving for me so I can discount the goods to my customers. Lower prices equal more sales equals more orders for you, and just sort of play it that way, work in a partnership. But that's why it's important to stay in touch with exchange rates. But all the stuff that I just mentioned about why it's important to stay in touch with China, it's like, there's so many different levels to this Amazon business. You got to focus on PPC, ManyChat, listings, all that sort of stuff. And this is very, very detailed, but I just wanted to show like this is the length that I go into. So if you ever have any questions about this sort of stuff, you can ask me.
Yeah, no, the going back to the exchange rates, walk me through a negotiation there for some of the sellers who may not doing placing 100 grand orders, because 10 grand obviously a lot of money for anyone.
Mm-hmm.
in context to what you earn anyway. But talk to me
Well,
through that negotiation. Kind of, yes, go back to them, do a screen grab. What helps in that kind of level of negotiation? Is it the face to face? You've already been to China, you've spent time with them, you broke bread. Can you do this with someone that you've not been on the ground with? You know?
yeah, I mean, to be fair, you have to have built up a decent relationship with your factory to ask for that sort of discount, and you have to basically have a standing order with them of having done like a few orders for the past few months or past few years to basically show that. But at the end of the day, the exchange rate is appreciated by more than 10% for them. So
Mm.
if you can just represent that, and they're making 10% more money just on the exchange rate, and just graphically show that, screenshot it, send it to them, and just show that because they can come up with all these excuses. Oh, but you know what? Like labor cost has also gone up 5%, and
Yeah, but they don't do that in 9 months.
yeah, exactly. So like the 10% is the extra that they're making, but maybe you might get 5% out of that. But just show that and then basically they'll extend the goodwill to you by offering you some of that discount that they've made, the extra that they've made. But
Makes sense.
the best time to ask is just before shipment, because just before shipment is when it's like the production's done. They're like, okay, cool, it's out of the warehouse. Just okay, fine. And then they're basically the last thing is they're just waiting for payment once the goods are on water. So if you bring it up at that point, that's when you're most likely to. Because if you bring it up at the start, then they're going to say, "Oh, by the way, we've also had a 5% increase in this order because of this, and this." So bring it up right before you pay them.
So basically, they're right. Okay, so I get that, right? From my point of view, maybe I'm a bit too soft with it, but I look at that as, and I know people do it. Effectively, it's the classic bait and switch. Yeah, you wait until you got leverage, then you do that. But what does that do to the relationship in terms of the relationship and the cultural aspect to the Chinese people? Is that a slap in the face? Is it standard business, or will they look at you and go, "Clever catch, that's good," and respect you more for it, from your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's a friendship thing. I mean, I'm very, very good friends with a lot of my suppliers. So if I genuinely ask them, look, can I get a 5% discount because you've made a 10% saving? It's like I would do the same thing for them as well. If I was making it extra, I would pass on some of that to them, especially if it results in more orders for me as well, because I'm not going to give them a 5% or 10% discount for them to then just keep that extra margin for themselves. But if they're passing that on to the consumer and they're going to get more market share as a result of that, that's not going to benefit the supplier as well. So as long as you explain that part as well.
Yeah, so it's the way that you ask it, it's the type of relationship that you have, and it's how you go about it is very important, isn't it? Because then it's not, if it's presented in such a way that is beneficial for both parties, rather than
exactly
I'm trying to get one up on you, because that obviously puts a dent in relationships. I know it would for me in certain cases. Do you see what I mean? Because you find it a little bit off if that comes out of left field.
For sure.
So going into difference between beginner and advanced sellers, talk to me, 3 pillars, etc.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of, when I sort of came in touch with this Amazon community, I saw there were sort of 3 different levels in terms of how people are dealing with China. There's beginner, intermediate, and advanced. And I sort of see the beginner level as the people who are just sourcing from Alibaba and global sources, which is great. That's how you get started. And then you're not expected to go out to China and source your first product when you're just getting started in this business, because maybe your first 2 products fail and it's your third product which actually starts to really generate a lot of profit and cash flow for your business. And it's at that point you should start to visit China. But I just want people to be aware that like Alibaba is a great website to get started, but the best suppliers don't exist on Alibaba, because Alibaba essentially works the same way as Amazon does, in that you pay to get to the top. So how good is a supplier really if they pay to get to the top of your listing? Whereas the best suppliers that I work with don't even list on Alibaba because their production lines are full, because they're that good a factory that they constantly get orders. So they don't need to advertise themselves to get orders. So the way you find those suppliers is at the Canton Fair. So I sort of see beginners, Alibaba, and global sources like online based, and then intermediate as Canton Fair. For those of you who don't know what the Canton Fair is, it's basically the biggest import-export exhibition in the world. It goes on twice a year, and you can find any product you want under that roof. You essentially have all the suppliers there in these little booths, and it's basically the size of an international airport, and you just basically navigate around it, finding all your best suppliers. And our good friend Athena runs an awesome trip called China Magic. If you want more details, it's ChinaMagicTrip.com, where basically it's a 12-day event and you navigate around the fair and then masterminds at night. And that really helps a lot of Amazon sellers. I've been a part of that trip for a while. And we really find you the best products, the best suppliers, the best prices, and do all of that on the trip. And then the sort of advanced level I see is like when your business is really booming, like you have to have a presence in the factory. You know, a lot of people use sourcing agents and the sourcing agents go to the factory for them. That's fine, but bear in mind that the sourcing agent now owns that relationship with the factory boss, not you as a customer. Whereas I'm very much people buying from people, face to face, go out drinking with the boss, you know, buy them gifts, you know, they know about me, I know about them. Like I've had some of my suppliers come to visit me in Scotland. I've attended some of my suppliers' weddings. I've gone on holiday with some of my suppliers. Like we're that close. And like when you need to ask for a favor, you would do anything for a friend. And that's the way I work with my suppliers as well.
Makes sense. So talk about, I don't know, best practices for, you know, from your point of view, you're very much advanced, and I'm sure the audience would enjoy knowing a little bit more about this, but off the beaten track, talk to me about best way to look for suppliers in China.
Sure, yeah. So I always feel that the quality of the questions that you ask determine the quality of your results. That's so important. I need to say it again, the quality of the questions that you ask determine the quality of your results. So it's all about asking the right questions when you're talking to suppliers, whether that be through Alibaba or emailing them or visiting them in the Canton Fair or talking face to face. These are the types of questions you should be asking. First of all, I'd like to ask, you know, are you a trading company or a factory? Now, the true answer to that doesn't matter. You know, you can get excellent products and prices from trading companies, and you can from factories. You know, trading companies offer you a service that maybe a factory can't give you. And a lot of people just assume, okay, I need to cut out a trading company, I need to go straight to the factory. Whereas in actual fact, trading companies can offer you sometimes better products because they have more knowledge in that sector, have access to more factories, and then also factories, some of them don't even have an export license, so they have to use a trading company. But it's just important for you to know like who you're dealing with. Then I like to ask, you know, where's your factory located? Are the office and the factory located together? Because quite often people make a trip or a plan to go and visit their factory. They have an office in Shanghai, but their factory was actually 4 hours away, and then they don't get around to seeing them. So just have an idea of where they're located, and then also which port did they ship from? Because you might buy, you know, 5 or 6 different products from 6 different factories in China, and you might be ordering full containers because you want to maximize your shipments, but not knowing that maybe 3 of your suppliers all ship from the same port. You could have just consolidated, you know, 3 orders from 3 different suppliers into 1 container. So it's important to know where everyone's located. Then you want to know like how many workers do you have in your factory? Now, I've worked with factories which have got 50 workers, and I've worked with factories which have got 2,000 workers. And the answer again to this doesn't really matter, but you want to paint the picture in your head of who you're dealing with, because, you know, maybe the factory with 2,000 workers are very, very strict. They have like hard policies that can get stuff done really quickly. But then a factory with 50 workers might be much more lenient, give you lower MOQs, basically adapt to your needs. And then you also want to know like how many units can you produce per month, because you want them to know that they can basically produce within your capabilities. And then also, depending on what sort of quantity you're ordering, always ask them to explain why the MOQ is the MOQ. Because so often like people ask for a product and they say that, oh, the MOQ is like 3,000 pieces. And then they're like, oh, that's too much for me, I can't do that. But if you actually ask them to explain why is it 3,000 pieces, well, it's because the fabric or the print that you want is some floral pattern which they don't have in stock. But had you just asked for, you know, the black or the red material, which they do have in stock, maybe the MOQ would have been 500 pieces. So always just get them to explain that. Then you want to know like which markets do they supply, you know, where's their attention going? They might supply the South American market, which it might be quite cheaper product, or they might supply the Korean and the Japanese market where it's more high-end stuff. They might be supplying the US market, so you want to know like, are they supplying your competition? Have they got their testing in place? Or if they supply mainly the European market, well, is it something that you can bring into the US that they haven't seen yet that's only working in Europe? So again, you just want to paint that picture. And then you want to ask them, you know, which brands do you supply? Because quite often, if you like the brands that they're basically focusing their attention on, then that's a plus for you. And then like, who's your biggest customer? Because it's kind of like the 80-20 rule. Like these factories have a lot of different customers, but maybe 80% of their attention just goes on like a small minority of customers. So you want to know who those customers are. And that's basically the quality that your factory is able to produce. And then one of the most important questions is, have you supplied any big retailers or department stores? Because, you know, if they're supplying Tesco, Walmart, Target, Aldi, Bed Bath & Beyond, all these guys, well then they've manufactured a price down to the lowest possible price it can be. And what I like to do is piggyback off those orders. So I think we talked about this on the previous podcast that we did, but if you have a good relationship with your factory, then you can say to them, all right, well, next time you're manufacturing this item for Walmart in which they're ordering 200,000 pieces, I'm going to add my small order of 2,000 pieces onto the back of that so I can benefit from their economies of scale, from their prices on materials and things like that. And obviously you don't want to copy any product, you want to change some things, but at least you can benefit from their economies of scale. And then ask them, do you supply any brands selling on Amazon? You want them to know, like, are they familiar with the Amazon business model? And then ask them as well, like, do you sell on Amazon? And again,
are they going to compete with you?
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I buy from factories which also sell on Amazon as well.
Yeah,
I just want to be aware of it because I want to have a backup as well, just in case their listing gets going really good and then they want to cut me out or something like that. At least I have a backup for it. So you just want to know these sort of things. And then very, very important is you want to ask them, like, has your factory completed any third-party audits? So
yeah.
Testing requirements. I mean, I don't think Amazon sellers really pay much attention to this, but you want to make sure that your factory's been audited to the highest standards. That's something that retailers ask for. They go in and they check, do you have any, there's no child labor, that they've got fire extinguishers in there, that the lighting is of a decent standard. And you just want to have those reports because anything coming out of your factory, you are responsible for. So if you can produce them a document, say, yeah, my factory is audited to the highest standards. And this is not a charge on you because that's something they've already produced. And then you can basically just get that document and then share it with whoever's asking for it.
Makes sense.
And then you also want to ask them, sorry, this list is quite long. I've probably got like another 5 or 6 questions to go through that I usually ask. And not all of them apply to every seller, but you can just sort of pick and choose which one does apply to you. Yeah. But then which products does your factory really specialize in? Like, what is your strongest item? Because at the Canton Fair, sometimes they show you 20 different products to get your attention, but really what they actually specialize in is just 2 or 3 of those products. So always ask them, like, what's the core strength of your factory? What is it you're best at? Like, one of my favorite items to produce is a backpack. But I use over 20 different backpack factories because one is for like outdoor bags, one's for travel bags, one's for military bags, one's for fashion bags. There's so many different strengths that factories have, but then you just pick and choose which are the best ones. And then you want to ask, does your factory have in-house testing? Because you can use like third-party testing companies like Intertech and SGS and Kima and guys like that. But the factories which have internal in-house testing are testing it before it goes to the third-party testing companies. So that always works in your advantage. And that factory cares about quality.
Makes sense.
Then you want to sort of ask, like, which new products have you been working on? Because, as we develop products, factories also develop products because they want to stay ahead of the curve. So you want to basically find out from them what they've been working on. And they only really share that with you if you have a long-term relationship with them. But if you don't, then they're not really going to be open to sharing that information with you. And then asking for exclusivity, if there's any new items on that, maybe just for 3 months. And then, those are just a few.
They're just a few, but I don't think I don't know if it's common that, because that first wave of having conversations with your factory, they're not all those questions you'll get out in the first email because you kind of scare them off, don't you?
Oh yeah, exactly.
So how would you warm them into that? Like, you give us that big long list, people can check this in the show notes. Mm-hmm. How would you warm that, the first engagement with, because if you go in with that huge list, they go, bloody hell, who you are? Who are you? Do you know what I mean? So,
yeah. I mean, no, that's a very good point. You have to go step by step. I mean, you just sort of like build the rapport with them, and like building the rapport with them doesn't necessarily have to be asking these questions. Excuse me. So for example, like, I always believe that you have to have a relationship with your supplier, like on WeChat and things like that. A lot of people just communicate by email, but once you communicate on WeChat and you send photos to your supplier of, what you're doing on the weekend, and send photos of like you going to an American football game or something like that, you start to build up that relationship. And then you sort of drop in these sort of questions. Oh, do you ever work with this brand? Or, do you work with this retailer? But if you just send them a long list of questions, like, it's good to ask these questions because you're showing your experience and you're showing your knowledge, and then they respect you compared to someone who just walks into the booth for the first time and just says, what's the price of this? Compared to someone saying, what testing have you done? Then they're like, okay, right, this guy knows. So
stuff.
Yeah, you just have to drop it in where you think it's relevant.
Cool. So we covered quite a lot of ground. Is there anything we've missed here?
Not really, but I think another aspect that people struggle with often is like the sampling process. I've been quite amazed in the people that I've worked with don't really get their pre-production and their pre-shipment samples. They just they get a sample like, okay, cool, yeah, I'll order that. But I always go through like 3 different samples. Like the first one is your counter sample. That's the one that you've basically, this is what you want to work from. You want to make some changes, but this is basically what you're working from. You basically specify the changes that you want to make, and then it maybe take 2 or 3 different versions, but then the factory will send you a pre-production sample. The pre-production sample is what you've ticked off. That's like, this is what I'm ordering, this is what I'm paying for, and this is what I expect to get. And you basically sign it off as your pre-production sample. Then you do the production, and then before the goods leave, that you get a pre-shipment sample, and you have to have that pre-production sample and pre-shipment sample right next to each other. And if they are not exactly the same, then you do not authorize that shipment to go. And if there are any discrepancies, then they fix it in China instead of fixing it in the USA, which will save you a lot. But people also ask me like, oh, well, do you pay for samples? And what I always say to my factories is that, yeah, look, I'll cover the cost of the freight of getting the sample here, and you cover the cost of the sample. That way it's sort of like a fair exchange. We're working in partnership together. But then I also order samples without actually placing an order. So what I do say is, look, I pay for all the samples that I don't order. But when I do place an order, I want you to basically refund the freight cost as well. So any order I do, I deduct all of that. But make sure whenever you're sending any samples from China, always state on the shipping documents that the samples are of no commercial value, and just put $1. Because if you're sending over like a $200 item, then customs will think you're actually buying that, and they'll charge you duty on that item. So just always say samples are of no commercial value.
Cool. See, the other thing what we may have missed out on is the naming structure for samples, like gold sample and stuff. I know you said pre-shipment. Do you want to run through the audience so that if people are not sure of what the sample's called in their strategic stages, it's always good to show that you know what you're talking about. So give us some examples of what stages each sample are and what they're called.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I think people call it like different things. I always just go by counter sample, pre-production sample, pre-shipment sample.
Yeah.
Where some people go off gold seal sample, which is like,
that's it. Yeah,
which is like your final. That's basically what you've approved for production. But yeah, it can be called either or. But as long as you make it explicitly clear in your email or in your notes that this is what I'm approving for shipment. And then the other thing is, if you're in China yourself, then you can actually just authorize it in person. Yeah,
of course. Sounds good. Cool. Should we wrap there?
Yep. Yeah, that's a good one.
Cool. And what's the best way that people can reach you if they've got questions, be able to email you, etc.?
Yeah, for sure. So actually, this is cool. I just started today my own Facebook group, just called Sourcing with Kian, just because I was getting a lot of DMs and private messages. So I thought, why not just build a community in a Facebook group where I'm just going to be writing a blog, do occasional webinars, and just answer any sourcing questions. It's all free. There's no charges. There's no upsells or anything like that. So there's just a Facebook group called Sourcing with Kian, which I just started today. Then there's ChinaMagicTrip.com for anyone who's interested in coming with us to China. And then Instagram is where I hang out the most. My Instagram is just Kian_JG, and I post a lot of stuff while I'm in China there as well.
Cool. So before October, because obviously the pair of us are going to be over there, as I said at the top of the show, I'll be at the cross border around the 22nd, 23rd. Then I'll be on China Magic Trip, and then I think I'm speaking on the 27th or the 28th in Hong Kong. Is there any speaking gigs you've got coming up? Because obviously I see you was out at Silicon, so you were speaking there. Have you got anything between now and October that you're doing?
Yeah, end of August, I'm doing one for Kevin King. I think that's an Amazon event for beginners, which should be quite cool. I think there's a lot of good speakers there, and I think that's 22nd to the 24th of August in Austin,
Texas.
That's right.
He's got 22 speakers, isn't he? Over 2 or 3 days. Yeah,
it's a lot.
Big lineup.
Yeah, I think that's more for beginners. So if you are a beginner, then check in with Kevin. That's going to be a great event. And then after that, it's just global sources in Hong Kong with yourself and Megla, and then China Magic as well.
Sounds good. Cool, guys. Thanks for joining us, Kian. Thank you for joining us. If this is your first time, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, and I'll see you again in the next few days. Take care.